These tasks use the assets in the folder Photoshop Task Assets. Download that to your desktop. If you're using a UCA PC, Games and Animation students, you may need to download it and put it into your documents instead. Double click on the folder icon and find the folder that's called Task 1 Basics. I'm just going to double click on that to open it. In there we've got a Photoshop file. We know it's a Photoshop file because it ends in .psd. I'm going to double click on that and it will automatically open in Photoshop. The document is opened in the Photoshop workspace. If you look around the workspace, you've got a menu bar at the top. You've got the options bar. On the left you have a toolbar. And on the right you have some panels where your properties and colour and swatches and other things will open up. We're going to start by just looking at the transform tools and layers. So at the moment I've got 4 layers in the layers panel. One called move, one called scale, one called rotate and one called background. I can turn on the visibility for these layers by clicking on the little eye. The layer called background is locked. That means that I can't make any changes to it. The other layers are all unlocked so that I can make changes. I can lock them using the lock icon here. Unlock them with the same icon. I'm going to start using the transform tool, move tool. So I'm going to choose it from the toolbar. Make sure the layer that I want to move is the one that's selected. We know it's selected because it's light grey over here. I'm just going to click on the first icon, hold the mouse and drag it upwards. I'm just going to Command Z on the keyboard to step back so I can show you again. Click on the first one, hold and drag upwards. The pink lines give you an idea, there are guides so that you can tell that you've moved it exactly up rather than moving it in a weird direction. I'm going to move to the second icon now, second image, that's called scale, and it's this little green one down here. I've selected it in the layers panel and I'm now going to use Command T on the keyboard to transform it to bring up the scale command. I can also do that from up here in the menu bar, so I could go to Edit and then down to Transform and Scale. So if I hover over the corners, I can just drag that in and out till it's the right size for me, and then hover my mouse in the middle and drag the whole thing up onto the shelf. I'm going to go to the third one now. And this one's upside down, so select it in the layers panel, Command T to transform. Now if I hover over the edge of it, as well as the little arrows for scale, there's also a curved arrow for rotate, and I can use that and just drag it round. Okay. It's pretty close by eye, but if I come up to the options panel, I can just adjust the degrees there if I need to, so that it's perfectly vertical. And then I'm just going to drag that one up as well. You may find in the options bar that the auto select is turned on. This means that you can just hover over any part of a layer and just drag that layer without having to go through the layers panel. Works quite well on documents like this where everything is quite separated, but when you start having things that are piled up together, it's very hard to select the layer you actually want and not the layers underneath it. So I tend to work with the auto select turned off. I'm going to save this document now. File, save as. I'm going to save it twice, so I'm going to save a PSD version, which will keep all these layers and any adjustments that we've made together. I'm going to call it Basics Finished. Check where it's going, so mine's going on the desktop and into my Photoshop assets and Basics task. And under Format, I'm going to leave that as Photoshop. Save and OK. I'm going to save another version that I'd be able to print out on paper or upload to the web. And for that I need to change the format. So if I click on where it says Photoshop, I can drop down this menu and there's a choice of different file types in there. I'm just going to choose JPEG, JPEG. And that'll give me JPEG in the format and JPG as the ending to the file. I'm going to choose Save, and I'm going to go with these options that are selected there. If I minimise the Photoshop window using the little orange spot there and go back to the task folder, you can see I've now got my original PSD file in there with the layers, my finished PSD file here, and it's also got all the layers together, and my JPG file, which I can use to print or to put on the internet and the web. That doesn't have the layers and adjustments added anymore, that's just a finalised image. So I'm going to go back to the task asset folder now and look in task 2 image adjustments. If I double click on there, I've got two things in here. I'm going to start with auto brighten a photo.jpg. Because this isn't a PSD file, it's not a Photoshop file, we need to tell Finder that we want to open it in Photoshop and not in Image Viewer or any of the other programs that computers have. So I'm going to right click on it, choose Open with Photoshop. So the image is opened in the Photoshop workspace, and we can see the other file that we had is still up here and we can choose between them. And at the moment it's locked, so I'm going to unlock it. We're just going to use the auto options to lighten this photograph. At the moment it's very dark, you can't see sort of this area here and around here, and it's lost all the detail here. So we want to change that, and there are lots of different ways you can do it. Some are very, very in-depth and a lot of fine-tuning, but we're just going to use the auto feature to do this. We can do it through the image layer, image adjustments, brightness and contrast. But anything we do through the image layer is destructive. It destroys the original image, and we don't want to do that if we can help it. We might want to go back in and make changes later. So we're going to go down to the bottom of the layers palette and choose the layer adjustments icon here, which is the little half circle, and click on that. And from there I'm going to choose brightness and contrast. Now we know we're not affecting the actual original image because it's come up in the layers panel as a separate thing. So anything we do here will affect the layer adjustment and not the image underneath. I'm just going to play with the sliders. and start trying to lighten up the darker areas. If you're not sure, there's also an auto feature here, so I can click on the auto feature and Photoshop will decide what it thinks the best way to expose this image would be. So that's another way of doing it. As I said, there are lots of other more in-depth things we can do, and we'll look at those later. From this task, I just want you to remember that we edit non-destructively by adding things from the adjustments layer panel and not from the image layer, the image in the menu bar. So we're next going to open another task, so File, to Open. Step back to your Photoshop task assets and go back to task 2 image adjustments, and this time we're going to choose hue saturation.psd. So lots of different ways you can open a file there. That should give you the chameleon picture. I'm just going to turn off the lock so that we can edit. So once again, we could edit this from the image panel, but we're not going to. We're going to make a layer so that we've not damaged the file and the image underneath. I'm going to make an adjustment layer. And I'm going to choose hue and saturation. Okay, so we know we're working on the layer, the adjustment layer, because it shows up here. And here is the panel. So if you play with the hue sliders, notice that you can change the colour of the chameleon. If you play with saturation, you can suck the colour out or add it back in to make it more vibrant. And lightness will darken the whole image or lighten the whole image. Okay, so you'll notice that the background also lightens and darkens. Whatever you're doing will work on the background as well. You can also choose a colour within the image itself to change by clicking on the hand arrow key here. So if I left click and turn that on, I get the eyedropper and I can choose a colour from the chameleon. It will highlight here. And I can just change that colour. I can use the slider to change the colour that I'm picking out as well. I'm going to close that panel and save as an image that I can print. So change Photoshop to JPEG. Label it so I know which one it is. And save. Go to OK. I'm going to close some of these now because it's getting a bit crowded. So click on the little X. Don't need to save the original, it's already there. Don't need to save that. And that one was already saved. If I go back to my task panel, I'm going to go into task 3 now. There are 2 images in here. I'm going to select both. So I've clicked on the first one, hold Shift and click on the second one, right click and open with Photoshop. And we should have 2 images of shoes there. Start with this one, Converse 1. Turn off the layer lock. For this task we're going to look at the delete tools. So over on the left we have an eraser tool. If you left click on that and come over to your shoe image and hold the mouse down, you can just rub and erase that layer. The grey and white checks show that that bit is now transparent, and as there's no background, there's no other layer behind this one, there's nothing to see. I'm just Command Z on the keyboard. I'm just going to step back from there so we can have a play. I'm going to go to the bracket keys on the keyboard, and bracket will make your brush much bigger, and one bracket will make your brush much smaller. There are lots of different brush settings that you can use on the eraser tool, but again we'll look at those later. I'm going to use Command Z to just step back from there and unlock. I'm going to go back to the eraser tool now and right click on it, and that will bring up a menu of other things. And this time I want to use the magic eraser tool, so I'm going to left click on that. If I hover on an area outside of my shoe and click, you'll notice it will take away all the colour that is attached to the colour that I've clicked on. So in this case it's taken all the white background away. So now I just have the shoe on an invisible background. So a transparent layer. So I'm going to have a play with blend modes and layers now. If you go back to your task folder, there's another folder in there called patterns, and if you double click on that it will open. It might take a moment to open some different images in there that we can use to layer onto our pattern. I'm going to choose one from here, hold down the left mouse button and drag it onto my Photoshop document. So it's not quite covering my shoe. Depending on the image you chose, you may or may not have one that covers. So if you don't, you can either just move it up a little bit, or remember you can scale in and scale out using the corner points. When you're happy with where it is, you can click on the tick or press enter on the keyboard. And that will just set the pattern. Now what I want to do is add that pattern to my shoe underneath. I'm going to use blend modes for this and a clipping mask. So if I right click on the wallpaper layer, scroll down, we have create clipping mask. Click on that, and that's added the pattern to the shoe shape and got rid of the pattern everywhere else. We've lost all the lines and definition in that shoe now, so I'm just going to make some changes to that. If I find the word normal here in the layers and click on the drop down, notice I can scroll down through these and you can watch the effect on your shoe pattern. So there are lots of different blend modes in there, and all Photoshop is doing is taking the image underneath and the image on top and applying an algorithm to give you an effect. That's a simple way of filling in a pattern on your garment. So I'm just going to choose multiply for mine. Art is subjective, choose whatever you like, whatever pattern, whatever blend mode you want on yours is fine. There we go, so I've got the shoe on the invisible background at the moment. I can save this down now into an entire shoe by selecting the layer, the pattern layer, holding shift and selecting the layer underneath it, the shoe layer, choosing Command E, and that's merged both layers into one. And if I use Command T to adjust, I can resize my shoe. I can drag it about. I could copy and paste it into another document if I wanted. And also with it selected, I can use Command C to copy and Command V to paste and create another one. And there I have a pair. Save that. Actually, we're going to put a white background back on. So I'm going to make a new layer down here. It's come up at the top of the layers panel. I'm just going to drag it to the bottom because layers are in sort of base order, and we want this at the bottom. We want it at the back of the image. I'll choose a colour from the colours palette. So I'm going to just click on that. Choose a colour from here. Refine it here by clicking on a different point and go to OK. I'm going to get the fill tool, which is over here under the eraser tool, the paint bucket tool as it's called now. Choose that and just click on the layer. I'm going to save that as a image file that I can print off now. So we go to File, Save As, and to name it, I'm just going to choose the file format as JPEG, save and OK. And there it is, my finished image. So we'll go back to Photoshop and choose the second boot here, Converse 2, and unlock the layer. I'm going to go through the same set of steps here, so choose the Magic Eraser tool and click on the white background. Straight away you'll notice that the white was such a close match between the shoe and the background that it's actually eaten away. It's deleted all those bits of the shoe there and all the laces, and obviously we don't want that. So Command Z to step back. We're going to go up to the options bar and look at the tolerance, which at the moment is quite high, it's 30. I'm just going to drop that down to 4 or 5, and it will take out a much smaller range, a much closer range to the original white that we click on. If I click on that now, you can see the shoe is intact. I'll just click on the bottom there as well. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the patterns. Choose a pattern, drop it on. In this case it doesn't quite fit because the shoe's a bit taller, so I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit. Click on the tick or enter on the keyboard. Hover over it in the layers panel, right click, create clipping mask. Come back up to the blend modes and choose blend. Use Shift to select both layers in the layers panel and Command E to merge them. Choose the move tool, Command T on the keyboard to scale and resize. Command C on the keyboard to copy, Command V on the keyboard to paste, and that gives you a pair. Move them around to where you want them. Create a new layer for the background, grab it and drag it down, get the bucket tool and fill the new layer. And I'm going to save that one, File, Save As, name it, change the format so you can print it off. Remember, if you want to come in back and work on this one again, you would need to save it as a Photoshop document as well to keep all the layers intact and the adjustments. So File, Save As, Photoshop, name it and save. So I'm going to close those down.